A small argument over a parking spot turned into something much worse. Police officers mistreated a black woman, yelling at her, grabbing her, and dragging her away. They thought she was just another person they could push around. But they had no idea who she really was, a Supreme Court judge. This story isn't just shocking. It's a powerful reminder of how unfairly some people are treated because of how they look. What happened next left everyone stunned and taught a big lesson about respect and justice. Before we tell you what happened, let us know where you're from in the comments. Make sure to like and share this story. It's one the whole world needs to hear. Stay with us, because the ending will leave you speechless. The story begins with Justice Elaine Carter, a woman of remarkable intelligence and unwavering strength. She's a sitting judge on the Supreme Court, known for her sharp mind and dedication to fairness. Despite her success, Elaine is humble and deeply connected to her community. She's also no stranger to struggles. Being a black woman in a high-profile role has meant facing bias and discrimination throughout her life. But Elaine has always handled these challenges with grace and strength, driven by her belief in justice for everyone. On this particular day, Elaine had just finished an early morning speaking event at a local school. She decided to stay at a nearby shopping plaza on her way home. Dressed simply in a casual blouse and jeans, she parked her car in a reserved spot, a space she had legally paid for. The sun was shining, and the lot was busy with people going about their day, families, workers on lunch breaks, and shoppers. Meanwhile, Officer Mark Williams, a seasoned cop with a stern attitude, was patrolling the same area. Mark had been on the force for over a decade, but his years of experience hadn't made him more understanding. Instead, they had hardened him. Mark believed he could always tell who was trouble, often judging people based on their appearance rather than their actions. His partner, Officer Dana Lopez, was new to the job and eager to prove herself, often following Mark's lead without question. Elaine calmly parked her car and stepped out, checking her phone for a grocery list. A moment later, Officer Williams approached her. His gaze lingered on her, scanning her appearance with suspicion. "Ma'am, this parking spot is reserved," he said, his voice sharp and accusatory. Elaine looked up, surprised. "I know, I reserved it," she replied, her tone polite but firm. She reached for the parking pass displayed on her dashboard to explain further, but Mark wasn't interested in listening. His tone grew harsher. "You're not supposed to be here. Show me proof right now." A few people nearby began to take notice. They watched quietly, unsure of what was happening, but sensing the tension. Elaine, staying calm, tried to explain again. "Sir, the pass is clearly visible on my dashboard. If you check, you'll see it's valid." Mark ignored her words. He crossed his arms and muttered something under his breath, loud enough for Elaine to hear. Probably forged. Donna, standing nearby, looked uneasy but didn't say anything. The parking lot, filled with the sound of passing cars and faint chatter, seemed to pause as the exchange grew tenser. People stopped to glance at what was happening, some even pulling out their phones to record. Elaine could feel their eyes on her, but she kept her composure. Years of experience had taught her the importance of staying calm, even when faced with disrespect. The situation had taken a turn. What should have been a simple misunderstanding was quickly turning into something far more serious. Elaine knew this moment wasn't just about her. It was about something bigger. She felt the weight of the assumptions being made about her, based not on her actions, but on her appearance. The tension in the air hinted at the conflict about to unfold, leaving the onlookers, and Elaine, bracing for what was to come. The quiet parking lot erupted into tension as Officer Williams grew more confrontational. Despite Elaine's calm explanation and the valid parking pass clearly displayed on her dashboard, Mark wasn't backing down. His voice became louder, drawing more attention from people nearby. "This is a reserved space," he barked. "If you can't prove you belong here, I'm going to have to take further action." Elaine, still composed, took a deep breath. "Officer, I've already explained. My parking pass is legitimate, and it's displayed for you to see. I'm not breaking any rules." But Mark wasn't interested in hearing her out. Instead, his assumptions took over. He looked at Elaine with narrowed eyes, his posture rigid. To him, she didn't look like someone who belonged in such a space. "How did you even get that pass?" he demanded, his tone dripping with suspicion. The crowd watching grew larger. A few people whispered to each other, their voices carrying disbelief. "What's going on?" one woman murmured. "Why won't they just check the pass?" Mark's partner, Officer Dana Lopez, stood to the side, looking increasingly uncomfortable. She glanced at the pass on Elaine's dashboard but didn't speak up. Dana was new to the job and unsure of how to challenge her senior officer, even though it was clear the situation was escalating unnecessarily. Elaine, feeling the weight of the growing tension, tried again. "Officer, I don't understand why you're treating me this way. If you'd take a moment to look at the pass, you'd see there's no issue." But her words only seemed to anger Mark further. He stepped closer to her, invading her personal space. "Don't tell me how to do my job," he snapped. Then, to Dana, he barked, "Get the cuffs." Dana hesitated, glancing at Elaine and then at Mark. "Are you sure?" she asked softly, but Mark cut her off with a sharp look. Elaine raised her hands slightly, her voice steady but firm. "There's no need for this. I haven't done anything wrong. You're making a mistake." By now, several bystanders were recording the scene on their phones. A man in the crowd shouted, "Leave her alone. She didn't do anything wrong." Another woman added, "Why don't you just check the pass instead of harassing her?" Mark ignored them, his face growing red with frustration. "Step back, all of you," he barked at the crowd. Then, turning back to Elaine, he said, "If you won't cooperate, we'll have to take you in." Elaine stood her ground, her voice unwavering. "I have been cooperating. I've explained myself clearly. This is unnecessary." But Mark wasn't listening. He grabbed Elaine's arm roughly, pulling her toward the patrol car. Elaine winced but didn't resist. "You're making a grave mistake," she said calmly, her words cutting through the chaos. Dana hesitated before stepping forward to assist, her hands trembling as she held the cuffs. The crowd grew louder, shouting in protest. "She didn't do anything," someone yelled. Another person added, "This is wrong." The tension in the parking lot was palpable. People were visibly upset, their voices creating a chorus of frustration and disbelief. Elaine, despite the humiliation of being manhandled in public, kept her composure. Her years as a judge had taught her the importance of staying calm, even in the face of injustice. As Mark pushed Elaine toward the patrol car, she turned her head slightly and said, "You'll regret this." Her calm warning hung in the air, sending a ripple through the crowd. Even Dana paused for a moment, her face showing a mix of doubt and discomfort. But Mark was too caught up in his assumptions to hear the gravity in Elaine's words. The crowd, now fully engaged, continued to record and protest. Their voices carried a sense of urgency, a plea for someone to stop the situation from spiraling further out of control. But for now, Elaine was being treated as though she were guilty of something she didn't do, all because of one man's prejudice. The scene ended with Elaine being placed in the back of the patrol car. The door slammed shut, leaving the crowd stunned and murmuring. And with that, The stage was set for the shocking truth to come to light. Inside the patrol car, Elaine sat silently, her hands cuffed behind her back. Her calm expression never wavered, but the tension in the air was undeniable. Outside, the crowd had grown, their voices louder as they questioned what was happening. People pointed their phones at the scene, capturing every second. Officer Williams sat in the driver's seat, angry and flustered. His partner, Officer Lopez, glanced nervously at him. "Mark," she said hesitantly, "don't you think we should check her ID again? What if we're wrong?" Mark frowned, his tone sharp. "She doesn't look like someone who should be parked here. It's probably a fake pass. We're doing the right thing." Elaine's calm voice broke through the tension. "Officer, I've already told you that my parking pass is valid. If you'd take a moment to look at my ID, you'd realize the mistake you're making." "What's going on?" one woman murmured. "Why won't they just check the pass?" Mark's partner, Officer Dana Lopez, stood to the side, looking increasingly uncomfortable. She glanced at the pass on Elaine's dashboard but didn't speak up. Dana was new to the job and unsure of how to challenge her senior officer, even though it was clear the situation was escalating unnecessarily. Elaine, feeling the weight of the growing tension, tried again. "Officer, I don't understand why you're treating me this way. If you'd take a moment to look at the pass, you'd see there's no issue." But her words only seemed to anger Mark further. He stepped closer to her, invading her personal space. "Don't tell me how to do my job," he snapped. Then, to Dana, he barked, "Get the cuffs." Dana hesitated, glancing at Elaine and then at Mark. "Are you sure?" she asked softly, but Mark cut her off with a sharp look. Elaine raised her hands slightly, her voice steady but firm. "There's no need for this. I haven't done anything wrong. You're making a mistake." By now, several bystanders were recording the scene on their phones. A man in the crowd shouted, "Leave her alone. She didn't do anything wrong." Another woman added, "Why don't you just check the pass instead of harassing her?" Mark ignored them, his face growing red with frustration. "Step back, all of you," he barked at the crowd. Then, turning back to Elaine, he said, "If you won't cooperate, we'll have to take you in." Elaine stood her ground, her voice unwavering. "I have been cooperating. I've explained myself clearly. This is unnecessary." But Mark wasn't listening. He grabbed Elaine's arm roughly, pulling her toward the patrol car. Elaine winced but didn't resist. "You're making a grave mistake," she said calmly, her words cutting through the chaos. Dana hesitated before stepping forward to assist, her hands trembling as she held the cuffs. The crowd grew louder, shouting in protest. "She didn't do anything," someone yelled. Another person added, "This is wrong." The tension in the parking lot was palpable. People were visibly upset, their voices creating a chorus of frustration and disbelief. Elaine, despite the humiliation of being manhandled in public, kept her composure. Her years as a judge had taught her the importance of staying calm, even in the face of injustice. As Mark pushed Elaine toward the patrol car, she turned her head slightly and said, "You'll regret this." Her calm warning hung in the air, sending a ripple through the crowd. Even Dana paused for a moment, her face showing a mix of doubt and discomfort. But Mark was too caught up in his assumptions to hear the gravity in Elaine's words. The crowd, now fully engaged, continued to record and protest. Their voices carried a sense of urgency, a plea for someone to stop the situation from spiraling further out of control. But for now, Elaine was being treated as though she were guilty of something she didn't do, all because of one man's prejudice. The scene ended with Elaine being placed in the back of the patrol car. The door slammed shut, leaving the crowd stunned and murmuring. And with that, The stage was set for the shocking truth to come to light. Inside the patrol car, Elaine sat silently, her hands cuffed behind her back. Her calm expression never wavered, but the tension in the air was undeniable. Outside, the crowd had grown, their voices louder as they questioned what was happening. People pointed their phones at the scene, capturing every second. Officer Williams sat in the driver's seat, angry and flustered. His partner, Officer Lopez, glanced nervously at him. "Mark," she said hesitantly, "don't you think we should check her ID again? What if we're wrong?" Mark frowned, his tone sharp. "She doesn't look like someone who should be parked here. It's probably a fake pass. We're doing the right thing." Elaine's calm voice broke through the tension. "Officer, I've already told you that my parking pass is valid. If you'd take a moment to look at my ID, you'd realize the mistake you're making." Mark scoffed, refusing to meet her eyes in the rearview mirror. "You think I don't know when someone's lying? I've been doing this for years." Elaine's voice remained steady. "Years of experience don't excuse bad judgment. Look at my ID, and you'll see that I've been honest with you." Lopez shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She had noticed the parking pass earlier and felt uneasy about the situation. "Mark," she said again, more firmly this time, "I really think we should check her ID. The crowd's getting upset." Mark groaned, clearly annoyed. "Fine," he snapped, opening the door and grabbing Elaine's bag. He rummaged through it and pulled out her wallet. Without even looking at the ID, he tossed the wallet back. "Satisfied," he muttered. Lopez quickly reached for the ID and looked at it carefully. Her face went pale. "Mark," she said softly, "you need to see this." Mark rolled his eyes but snatched the ID from her hand. His expression changed immediately. He stared at the card in disbelief, his jaw tightening. His voice was almost a whisper as he read aloud, "Justice Elaine Carter, Supreme Court Judge." Elaine sat calmly in the back seat, her steady gaze locked on him. "Now, you understand the mistake you've made," she said firmly. "But this isn't just about me. It's about how quickly you judged me based on assumptions." Mark's hands trembled as he held the ID. He swallowed hard, his mind racing. "I didn't know," he stammered. "You didn't care to know," Elaine replied, her tone even but pointed. "Instead of listening to me or checking the facts, you assumed I was in the wrong. This is what happens when bias and power mix." Lopez looked at Elaine with wide eyes, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry, Justice Carter. I didn't realize. I should have spoken up sooner." Elaine nodded slightly. "Apologies are a start, but they're not enough. Change requires action." Mark slowly opened the car door and stepped out. The crowd grew quiet as he walked around to Elaine's side. With a shaky hand, he opened the door and helped her out. The people watching erupted in cheers and applause, their voices filled with relief and support. Elaine stood tall, her dignity intact despite what had happened. Mark handed her the ID, his voice barely audible. "I'm sorry," he said, his head bowed. Elaine took the ID, her expression calm but firm. "Sorry isn't enough, Officer Williams. You must reflect on your actions and learn from this. Accountability is not optional." The crowd shouted words of encouragement. "You tell him," one person yelled. Another added, "This is why we need real justice." Elaine turned to face the crowd, her voice clear and steady. "Thank you for standing up and watching this unfold. This isn't just my story. It's a reminder of how far we still have to go to ensure justice is equal for everyone." Lopez stepped forward, her voice breaking. "Justice Carter, I'm deeply sorry for what happened. I'll do better." Elaine looked at her with a hint of kindness. "We all have a responsibility to do better. That's how we change the system." Mark stood frozen, his face filled with regret. The confrontation had ended, but the weight of what he had done was only beginning to sink in. Elaine walked away from the scene with her head held high, leaving behind a lesson no one in that parking lot would ever forget. The parking lot was still buzzing with noise as Elaine stood outside the patrol car. She held her head high, her calm and steady presence in sharp contrast to the chaos around her. Officer Williams clutched her ID tightly, his face pale as he stared at it. His lips moved, but no words came out. "You're a Supreme Court judge?" he finally managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. Elaine met his gaze, her voice firm but clear. "Yes, officer. And what you've done today, yelling at me, grabbing me, and putting me in handcuffs, was wrong. You judged me without knowing anything about me." The crowd, which had grown larger, gasped at the revelation. People murmured to each other, their shock evident. "She's a judge?" someone said. "Oh, they're in big trouble now." Mark looked down at the ID in his hand, as if hoping it would somehow change. "I didn't know," he stammered. "I didn't mean—" Elaine raised a hand, cutting him off. "You didn't know because you didn't care to find out. Instead, you looked at me, made assumptions, and decided I was in the wrong. This isn't just a mistake. It's a pattern of behavior, and it needs to stop." Mark opened his mouth to reply, but couldn't find the words. His partner, Officer Lopez, stood a few steps away, looking shocked and uncomfortable. She finally spoke up, her voice hesitant. "Justice Carter, I'm so sorry. I saw the parking pass and I should have said something. I didn't. That's on me." Elaine turned to her tone soft but firm. "Acknowledging your mistake is a good start, Officer Lopez, but that's not enough. You need to act differently next time." The crowd grew louder, with people shouting words of support. "This is why we record everything," a man said, holding his phone up high. Another person added, "This isn't just about her. It happens to so many people." Mark turned to the crowd, his voice shaky. "Please, everyone, calm down. This was just a misunderstanding." Elaine's voice rang out clearly. "This wasn't just a misunderstanding. Misunderstandings don't end with someone in handcuffs. This was about bias, yours. You judged me because of how I look, and you let that guide your actions." The crowd clapped and cheered, their energy shifting from anger to support for Elaine. Mark looked at her, his face filled with regret. I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely audible. "I didn't think." "No, you didn't," Elaine said. "And that's the problem. You acted without thinking, without listening, and without respect. That's why people don't trust the system, because of actions like yours." Officer Lopez stepped forward, her voice stronger now. "Justice Carter, what happened today was wrong. I can't undo it, but I promise to do better." Elaine nodded. "I hope you mean that, Officer Lopez. Change doesn't come from words alone. It comes from actions. Speak up when you see something wrong. Don't stay silent." Mark, still holding her ID, took a shaky step forward. "I don't know how to fix this," he said quietly. "You start by reflecting on what happened here," Elaine said. "Think about why you acted the way you did. And think about the harm you caused, not just to me, but to the people watching who now trust you even less." Mark nodded, his head hanging low. "I will," he said. "I promise." Elaine looked at him for a long moment before turning to the crowd. "Thank you for being here and standing up for what's right," she said. "Your voices matter. Keep speaking up when you see injustice." The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers echoing through the parking lot. Elaine's calm strength inspired everyone watching. Someone from the crowd called out, "Justice Carter, will there be consequences for them?" Elaine paused, choosing her words carefully. "Accountability is important," she said. "This will not end here. It will be addressed through the proper channels. But more than consequences, we need change. One incident won't fix a system." Her words struck a chord with the crowd, who nodded and clapped in agreement. Officer Lopez stepped closer, her voice trembling. "Justice Carter, is there anything I can do to make this right?" Elaine met her gaze. "You can challenge the system that allows this behavior. Educate yourself and those around you. And next time, don't stay silent." Lopez nodded firmly. "I will," she said. Mark, still standing quietly, looked overwhelmed. The weight of his actions was heavy on him. Elaine turned to him one last time. "Officer Williams, I hope you've learned something today. This isn't just about me. It's about everyone who's been mistreated because of someone else's assumptions." Mark swallowed hard and nodded. "I understand. I'm sorry." The crowd began to disperse, but the energy of the moment lingered. Elaine walked to her car, her head held high. People clapped and cheered as she left, their admiration for her clear. Videos of the incident would soon spread far and wide, sparking conversations about bias, accountability, and justice. Mark and Lopez stood by the patrol car, watching her drive away. "What do we do now?" Lopez asked quietly. Mark sighed, his voice filled with regret. "We listened to what she said, and we do better." The parking lot returned to normal, but no one who witnessed the events that day would ever forget them. Elaine had turned a painful moment into a powerful lesson, not just for the officers, but for everyone who saw it. The video of the incident spread quickly online. Within hours, it had been viewed millions of times. People around the world were outraged by what they saw. The story of a black woman, humiliated by police officers over a parking spot, only for her to reveal herself as a Supreme Court judge, struck a nerve. It became a spark for a larger conversation about bias, power, and justice. Back at the police station, Officer Williams sat in a small office, staring at the screen of his phone. The video of him yelling at Justice Carter and pulling her toward the patrol car was all over the internet. The comments were harsh and unforgiving. "This is exactly what's wrong with the system," one read. Another said, "How many people has this officer treated like this who weren't judges?" Williams felt a deep sense of shame. He thought about what Justice Carter had said. "Think about why you acted the way you did." He couldn't stop replaying the moment in his head, wondering how he let his assumptions cloud his judgment. He realized it wasn't just this one incident. He had been making assumptions like this for years. His partner, Officer Lopez, knocked on the door and stepped inside. She looked tired but determined. "Mark," she said, sitting across from him, "I've been thinking a lot about what happened." Williams nodded, but didn't say anything. Lopez continued, "She was right. We didn't listen. We let our assumptions guide us instead of the facts. I'm reporting myself to the department for failing to speak up." Her words surprised Williams. "You're reporting yourself?" Lopez nodded. "If I want to be better, I have to start by taking responsibility. Justice Carter said change begins with action, and I want to hold myself accountable." Williams sighed deeply. "I need to do the same. This has been a wake-up call for me. I don't want to be the kind of officer who makes people feel unsafe or unwelcome." Meanwhile, Justice Carter had returned to her office. The day's events were still fresh in her mind, but instead of dwelling on her anger, she focused on how to turn the experience into something meaningful. She drafted a public statement, not to condemn the officers, but to call for systemic change. In her statement, she wrote, "What happened to me is not unique. I was lucky enough to have my position and platform to protect me, but countless others face the same injustice without the power to fight back. This isn't just about one officer or one incident. It's about the biases that exist in the systems meant to serve and protect us. It's time for real change, not just in policies, but in attitudes and training. I stand with all those who have been wronged, and I will continue to fight for justice. Her words resonated deeply with people across the nation. News outlets covered her statement, sparking a wave of discussions about police reform and bias. Many people who had experienced similar situations shared their stories, creating a powerful movement for accountability and fairness. At the same time, the police department launched an investigation into the incident. Officer Williams and Officer Lopez were both suspended during the review. While the department initially tried to frame the incident as a misunderstanding, public pressure forced them to take it more seriously. Officer Williams decided to take an additional step. He reached out to Justice Carter directly, asking for a chance to apologize in person. When they met, Williams was visibly nervous, but he spoke honestly. "Justice Carter," he began, "I want to say I'm truly sorry for how I treated you. I made assumptions based on bias, and I didn't listen to you when I should have. I've been reflecting a lot since that day, and I realize how much harm I caused, not just to you, but to everyone who watched and saw me as a symbol of what's wrong with the system." Elaine listened carefully before responding. "Officer Williams, I appreciate your apology, but an apology is only meaningful if it leads to change. What steps are you taking to make sure this doesn't happen again?" Williams explained that he had enrolled in bias training and was actively working with a community organization to better understand the perspectives of the people he served. "I can't undo what I did," he said, "but I want to do better moving forward." Elaine nodded. "Change is hard, but it's necessary. I hope you continue to reflect and take action. Accountability is a journey, not a single step." The incident also had a profound effect on Officer Lopez. She became an advocate for better police training and used her experience as an example of why officers need to challenge each other when they see wrongdoing. "It's not enough to follow orders," she said in a public statement. "We have to stand up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable." The larger impact of the event was undeniable. Police departments across the country faced renewed calls for reform. Community leaders, activists, and officials worked together to push for policies that emphasize de-escalation, accountability, and the elimination of bias in policing. For Elaine, the incident became a powerful reminder of the work that still needed to be done. She continued to use her position to fight for justice, not just in the courtroom, but in everyday life. Her experience became a symbol of hope and change, inspiring others to speak up and demand better. As the weeks passed, the memory of that day in the parking lot stayed with everyone who had witnessed it. For the crowd, it was a moment of standing together against injustice. For the officers, it was a lesson in humility and growth. And for Elaine, it was a reminder of the power of truth and perseverance. Elaine's story didn't just end with the incident. It sparked conversations and change far beyond that parking lot. It reminded people everywhere of the importance of speaking up against bias and holding those in power accountable. It also showed that dignity and calmness in the face of injustice could create ripples of impact. This event wasn't just a lesson for the officers involved. It was a lesson for all of us. It reminded us that assumptions can harm, silence can enable, and courage can inspire change. Elaine's resilience turned an act of injustice into an opportunity for growth and reflection, not just for herself, but for everyone who witnessed or heard her story. Now, it's time for you to reflect. If you were in Elaine's place, Or even in the crowd, what would you have done? How can we all work together to build a fairer, more just world? If this story moved you, please take a moment to share it with someone who needs to hear it. Comment, and let us know your thoughts. Every voice matters in this conversation. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us of our shared humanity and the importance of standing up for what's right. Thank you for watching, and remember, real change starts with each of us. Stay safe, stay aware, and we'll see you in the next story.